He only stopped for coffee in a snowy lake town. But inside the Blue Lantern, a waitress was being broken so quietly that everyone had learned not to hear it. Wyatt Bellamy had spent years moving on before trouble could learn his name. Then his German shepherd, Vesper, stood between the waitress and the man who owned her paycheck, her room, and her fear. Wyatt bought the failing diner to give one woman a way out. But the deeper he looked, the more he realized the whole town had been charging people for mercy. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Every new voice helps keep stories like this alive. Snow made everything look forgiven. That was what Wyatt Bellamy thought as his old pickup rolled along the shore road above Lake Superior, its tires whispering over packed white slush, its heater coughing like an old man with secrets. The morning was bright in that hard northern way, the kind of brightness that did not warm anything but made every roof, fence post, and pine branch shine as if the world had been dipped in salt. Beside him, Vesper rested his gray cream muzzle against the passenger window. The German shepherd had been quiet for the last 40 miles, amber eyes following the lake through the glass. His ears shifted whenever the truck rattled over a bad patch of road, one standing straight, the other tilting outward in that half-relaxed, half-listening way Wyatt had come to trust more than most weather reports. "You see something I don't?" Wyatt asked. Vesper exhaled against the window and fogged a small circle onto the glass. "Helpful?" Wyatt's voice was rough from disuse. He had spoken more to the dog than to people for the better part of 2 years, and the dog, being merciful, had never asked him to explain himself. Brightwater appeared below the road like a painted thing. A small town cupped between white hills and a frozen blue lake, its church steeple rising above clean roofs, its sidewalks shoveled, its storefronts strung with winter lights, though Christmas had already passed. Everything looked orderly. Too orderly, maybe. The kind of place that swept its broken glass into the alley and put fresh curtains in the window. Wyatt had no reason to stop there except coffee, fuel, and the stubborn hope that the truck would not choose today to die. He was 47 years old, though mornings like this made his bones argue for older. His red and black plaid winter coat lay heavy across his shoulders, the lining worn soft from years of use. Beneath it, a charcoal sweater scratched faintly at his neck. His canvas pants were stained near one knee from fixing the truck's belt outside Marquette 2 nights earlier. His boots had salt crusted along the seams. He had been many things in his life. Soldier, husband, briefly and badly. Mechanic when work was easy to find. Night watchman, man passing through, man sleeping in a truck with a dog who deserved a better bed. What he had not been, for a long time, was someone who stayed. The sign for the Blue Lantern flickered at the corner of Harbor Street and Lake Road. It was shaped like an old metal lantern, painted blue once, now chipped and rusting around the edges. The neon inside still glowed, but weakly, as though the light had to think about it before agreeing to shine. Wyatt pulled into a space along the curb. "Coffee," he told Vesper. "Maybe eggs if they don't look dangerous." Vesper stood on the seat and stretched, claws clicking against the vinyl. Snowflakes landed on his back when Wyatt opened the door, dusting the gray along his shoulders until he looked briefly like some winter spirit that had chosen, for reasons known only to heaven, to ride in a 1998 pickup. The diner smelled better than it looked. Cinnamon, burnt coffee, fried onions, old wood, wet wool. The windows were fogged from the inside, and someone had taped a paper snowflake to the glass near the door. 6 booths lined one wall. A counter ran along the other, its stools patched with silver duct tape. A small gas stove hissed in the corner, losing a private war against the cold. There were 7 customers inside. 2 older men in caps sat over toast. A woman in a postal jacket warmed both hands around a mug. A young couple, no, not young, Wyatt corrected himself, just younger than his tiredness, argued softly over a map. Nobody looked directly at him for more than a second. Then they looked at Vesper. Vesper did not seek attention. He simply entered, paused, and surveyed the room with the calm seriousness of a retired judge deciding whether the floorboards were honest. "Dog stays by me," Wyatt said before anyone could object. From behind the counter, a woman with brown copper hair tied low at the nape of her neck glanced over. Her diner dress had once been pale blue, but long washing had turned it the color of winter sky before a storm. A white apron hung at her waist, damp near the hem. A cardigan the color of old cream covered her arms, though both cuffs were wet dark. She looked at Vesper first, then Wyatt. "As long as he doesn't order better than you do," she said. "Than you do," she said. Her voice was quick, dry, and tired around the edges. Wyatt felt the corner of his mouth move before he could stop it. He usually does. That earned him half a smile. Not a real one, a working smile, the kind carried in a pocket and unfolded for strangers. "Sit anywhere," she said. "Coffee?" "Yes, ma'am." "Dangerous word in here?" "Coffee?" "Safer." He took the booth nearest the window, where he could see the truck, the street, and most of the room without turning his head. Old habit. Vesper settled beside his boots, but not fully. The dog's body remained alert, his nose moving, his gaze drifting toward the counter. The waitress brought coffee in a thick white mug. Her name tag said, "Lena," the black letters rubbed at the edges. "You passing through?" she asked. "That obvious?" People who live here don't look at the lake like it might give them instructions. Wyatt looked out at the frozen sheet of blue-white beyond the street. Maybe it should. Lena's smile came closer to real this time, then vanished when a voice from the kitchen doorway cut through the room. "Lena." One word, soft, almost pleasant. The man who said it stood with one hand on the doorframe, dressed in a white shirt and brown wool vest, his hair combed neatly to the side. He had a round, pinkish face and a small gold chain disappearing into his vest pocket. Everything about him looked polished, from his shoes to his smile. Nothing about him felt warm. Lena turned too quickly. "Yes, Mr. Pike." "Mr. Pike." Wyatt filed that away. The man lifted a slip of paper between two fingers. "Table 4 is short." Lena's eyes flicked toward the two men in caps, then back. "I'll check it." "You'll pay it." The room changed, but no one moved. That was the thing Wyatt noticed. Not the words, not even the tone. It was the practiced stillness of everyone else, as if they had heard this song before and knew better than to hum along. Lena took the paper. "It's $3. $3 is money." "I know." "Do you?" Her face did not break. That was worse. She had built a whole little house inside herself where humiliation could be stored until later. Wyatt's hand closed around his mug. "Do not," he told himself. There were rules for men like him, rules learned late and paid for dearly. Do not step into another town's trouble. Do not mistake one moment for the whole story. Do not make yourself the storm just because the air already smells like rain. Vesper stood, not fast, not with a growl. He simply rose from the floor and walked across the diner. "Vesper," Wyatt said under his breath. The dog did not stop. Lena had bent to wipe something near the counter, though Wyatt could see there was nothing there worth wiping. Pike had followed her, still speaking softly enough that the room could pretend not to hear. "You make mistakes when you get comfortable," Pike said. "That's your problem. Comfort makes you forget gratitude." Vesper stepped between them. His body was not tense, but it was placed with the kind of precision Wyatt recognized. Shoulder angled toward Lena, head level, eyes on Pike. The gray cream fur along his neck lifted just enough to become a warning written in a language older than law. The diner went silent enough to hear the stove hiss. Pike looked down at the dog, then at Wyatt. "You want to call him off?" Wyatt rose slowly. His knees complained. His heart did something worse. "He's not on." Lena stared at Vesper as if no living creature had ever stood in front of her without wanting something in return. Pike's smile thinned. "I don't allow animals threatening my staff." "Funny," Wyatt said, voice even. "Looked like he was protecting your staff." One of the old men at the counter found sudden interest in his toast. The postal woman lowered her mug without drinking. Pike turned fully toward Wyatt. Up close, he smelled faintly of aftershave and fryer oil. "You passing through?" "Yes." "Then pass through." Wyatt could have left then. Should have, maybe. A wiser man would have apologized, taken the dog, and driven west until Brightwater became another name behind him. He had made a life out of leaving before places asked too much. But Vesper had not moved, and Lena's hands were shaking, not dramatically, just enough. The fingers around the wet cloth trembled, then stilled by force. Wyatt remembered, without wanting to, 1,000 rooms where no one had stepped forward. Barracks, hospitals, court offices, kitchens after midnight, places where pain kept its voice down because other people were tired of hearing it. He took one step closer. "Back up," Wyatt said. "No thunder in it, no threat, just the weight of a door being closed." Pike studied him. Perhaps he saw the broad shoulders beneath the worn plaid coat, the old break in the bridge of his nose, the steady tiredness in his eyes. Perhaps he saw only a man with a dog and no local address. "You and your animal can get out," Pike said. "Now." Wyatt nodded once. "Gladly?" Lena looked as if she might speak, then swallowed whatever it was. Vesper backed away only when Wyatt touched 2 fingers to his collar. The small metal lantern tag gave a faint, bright sound. It seemed too gentle a noise for the room. Outside, the cold hit clean and sharp. Lena came out less than a minute later, carrying a trash bag she did not need to carry. Snow landed in her hair and melted there. Without the diner's yellow light on her face, she looked younger in one way and older in another. "I'm sorry," she said. Wyatt leaned against the truck. "For what?" "For him. For the dog thing. For—" She stopped and gave a small, humorless laugh. "Listen to me, apologizing like I trained for it." Vesper approached her carefully. He did not jump. He sat in the snow at her feet and lowered his head. Lena looked down at him. Something in her expression slipped. Not sadness exactly. Recognition. "He has better judgment than most men I've met," she said. "That's a low fence, but he clears it." A laugh escaped her before she could guard it. It was small and startled, like a bird flying out of a chimney. Wyatt felt something answer in his chest. Not hope. He distrusted hope. But maybe the memory of it. The diner door opened behind her. "Lena?" Pike called from inside. Still soft. Still poisonous. "Clock doesn't stop because you're emotional." Her shoulders tightened. Wyatt looked at the door, then at her. "You don't have to go back in there." The words were foolish the moment they left him. He knew it. She knew it. The world knew it. Lena pulled the trash bag closer as if it could keep her upright. "I rent the room above the storage garage behind the diner." Wyatt said nothing. "He owns that too," she added, "and according to him, I still owe for the heater repair, and the freezer door, and 3 uniforms I never asked for." Snow kept falling between them, soft as ash from a very patient fire. "How much?" Wyatt asked. She smiled again, but this time it hurt to see. "That's the trick. It changes whenever I get close." The door clicked shut behind her when she went back inside. Wyatt stood in the cold for a long moment. He could see her through the fogged window, moving between tables, refilling mugs, carrying plates, wearing that folded smile again. Pike watched from near the register with his hands in his vest pockets. Wyatt opened the truck door. Up, Vesper did not move. Vesper? The dog sat facing the diner. Snow collected along his back and on the crescent of cream fur at his chest. His amber eyes stayed fixed on Lena through the glass. Wyatt rubbed both hands over his face. Don't do this. Vesper did nothing. That was the trouble with a good dog. A bad man could be argued with. A good dog simply placed the truth in front of you and waited until you got tired of stepping around it. Wyatt looked west, where the road left Brightwater and curved beyond the pines. Out there was freedom of a kind, gas stations, cheap motels. Choose silence. No one expecting him to become better than he had managed to be. Then he looked at the blue lantern. The sign flickered again, blue light trembling in the snow. Wyatt reached into his coat pocket and took out his old silver Zippo. He turned it once in his palm, thumb moving over the dented corner and the faint engraving of a tiny lantern. He had carried it through deserts, rain, hospitals, and too many parking lots to count. He did not smoke any more. Some things a man kept not because he needed them, but because they remembered who he had been before he forgot. He put the lighter back. All right, he said to the dog. Remembered who he had been before he forgot. He put the lighter back. All right, he said to the dog, but if this gets ugly, I'm blaming you. Vesper stood at once, tail giving one slow sweep. Inside, the bell over the diner door rang a second time. Pike looked up from the register with open irritation. Lena froze near the coffee machine. Wyatt walked to the counter, took $3 from his wallet, and placed it beside his half-finished mug. For the short table, he said. Pike's mouth curved. Or charity? No? Then what? Wyatt glanced around the diner. The patched stools, the fogged windows, the tired stove, the customers pretending not to listen, the woman in the blue uniform holding a coffee pot like it was the only thing keeping her from shaking apart. Then he looked back at Pike. You selling this place? The room seemed to inhale. Pike blinked once. Lena stared at Wyatt as though he had just asked whether winter itself came with a price tag. Wyatt kept his hand flat on the counter, steady as a stone set before a hearth. I'm asking, he said, because it looks like the light's about gone out in here. And for the first time since he had stepped into Brightwater, no one knew what to say. By noon the next day, everyone in Brightwater knew the man with the gray cream shepherd had asked to buy the blue lantern. By evening the story had grown antlers. At the hardware store, someone said Wyatt Bellamy was a millionaire pretending to be poor. At the post office, someone else said he was running from the law. In Mulligan's bar, where the stools remembered more secrets than the church confessional, an old fisherman claimed Wyatt had once been special forces and could kill a man with a spoon. Wyatt heard that last version while buying dog food. He looked down at Vesper. You hear that? I've been promoted to cutlery assassin. Vesper sneezed into a sack of kibble. That's what I thought. Brightwater watched him with the shy cruelty of a town that had not yet decided whether a stranger was entertainment or threat. Curtains shifted when he passed. Conversations bent around him. People smiled politely, but their eyes measured the rust on his truck, the patched sleeve of his red and black plaid coat, the dog hair on his pants. He did not blame them. He looked exactly like a man who should not own anything heavier than a duffel bag. The blue lantern sat under a fresh fall of snow, its blue sign blinking over the sidewalk in weak little pulses. Inside, Orson Pike had gone about business as if nothing had changed. He poured coffee for familiar customers, laughed at jokes, and moved through the diner with his pocket watch chain glinting against his vest like a tame snake. Only Lena seemed unable to pretend. She avoided looking at Wyatt when he came in that morning. She refilled mugs, wiped counters, wrote orders, carried plates. Her face held that professional brightness again, but now it had a crack in it. Not fear exactly. Anger, maybe. Anger held carefully, because in Brightwater even anger seemed to come with rent. Wyatt did not push her. He had spent enough of his life watching people mistake silence for emptiness. Silence was rarely empty. Most of the time, it was crowded with things too tired to stand up. At 10 o'clock, Orson slid into the booth across from him with 2 folders and the smile of a man setting bait in clear water. "You're serious," Orson said. "I asked serious." "Not the same thing." Wyatt took a sip of coffee. It was overboiled and bitter enough to have survived combat. "You selling?" Orson leaned back. "Everything is for sale if the buyer understands what he's buying." "And what am I buying?" "A name, a location, equipment, regular customers, goodwill." Lena passed close enough to hear that last word. Her hand tightened around the coffee pot. Wyatt noticed. Orson noticed Wyatt noticing. "The building needs work," Wyatt said. "All old buildings need work." "The stove sounds like it's praying for death." "That stove has fed half this town." "Maybe it wants a medal." For the first time, Orson's smile thinned in a way that showed the bone underneath. Then he opened the folder. The numbers were bad. Not ruined on paper bad. Worse, they were dressed up bad. Back taxes, supplier liens, utility warnings, a repair loan that had somehow become 3 loans, and a note from the bank with language polite enough to hide its teeth. The Blue Lantern was not a business. It was a snowman built around a lit match. Wyatt read every page. Son, he had never been a wealthy man, but poverty taught arithmetic better than school ever could. He knew how long $100 lasted in winter. He knew the sound a bank account made when it was nearly empty. He knew the difference between being broke and being trapped. The diner was trapped. Orson tapped one finger on the table. "You still interested?" Wyatt looked at him. "Why sell to me?" "Because you asked." "No." Orson's eyes warmed falsely. "Because I'm tired. Because the place needs fresh blood. Because a man gets to an age where he wants sunshine." "In January?" "Arizona has January, too." Wyatt closed the folder. You're behind." "A temporary condition." "You want out before someone else decides when you leave." That landed, not loudly, not visibly to anyone else. But Orson's right hand moved to the chain of his pocket watch, and Wyatt saw the small anger there. "You were military?" Orson asked. "Was." "Men like you often confuse suspicion with intelligence. Men like you often count on it." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Orson laughed, soft and pleasant, as if Wyatt had said something charming at a dinner party. "You'll need a bank," he said, "and a miracle." Wyatt stood. "I'll start with the bank." The Brightwater Savings and Trust occupied a brick building beside the church, neat as a postage stamp and twice as judgmental. Its windows were polished clean. A brass bell over the door gave a dignified ring when Wyatt stepped inside, as though announcing a man who should have worn better boots. Mara Ellison did not make him wait long. She came out of her office carrying a file she had already started, which told Wyatt 2 things. She knew why he was there, and Brightwater's gossip traveled faster than snowmelt through a cracked roof. Mara was in her mid-40s, with ash-blonde hair cut clean at her jaw and eyes pale enough to make most lies feel underdressed. She wore a long charcoal coat over a dark blue turtleneck, and when she shook Wyatt's hand, her grip was dry, brief, and exact. "Mr. Bellamy," she said, "your dog can wait in the lobby if he behaves." Vesper sat before she finished the sentence. Mara glanced at him. That was not a challenge. "He's used to higher-ranking officers." One corner of her mouth moved. Barely. It vanished before becoming a smile. Inside her office, everything had a place. Papers squared, pens aligned, A small ceramic dish held paper clips by size. On the wall behind her desk hung a framed photograph of Lake Superior, in summer, blue and innocent as if the lake had never tried to kill anyone. Mara, sat and opened the file. "I'll be direct," she said. "You cannot afford this diner." Wyatt nodded. "All right." That was not a negotiation tactic. That was the conclusion. I understood it. You have limited savings, a modest veteran's benefit, no local employment history, no business ownership experience, and your vehicle is old enough to vote. Truck's sensitive about its age. Your truck is collateral only in a philosophical sense. Wyatt looked down at his hands. The knuckles were rough, the nails clean but scarred around the edges. Hands that had fixed engines, loaded crates, held rifles, carried men, washed diner dishes twice in his life and poorly, both times. I don't want to buy it because I think I'm good at diners," he said. Mara waited. He looked back up. "I want to buy it because yesterday I watched a woman get treated like the floor under someone's boot, and the room acted like weather was happening. I'm tired of weather." Mara's expression did not soften, but something behind it shifted its weight. "That is not a business plan." "No. It is also not nothing." For a while, only the wall clock spoke. Then Mara removed her glasses, cleaned them slowly with a cloth, and said, "Orson Pike has been trying to sell quietly for 4 months. He owes this bank money. He owes the county money. He owes suppliers from Duluth to Ashland. Oh, if the diner closes, the building goes into a process that will take a year, maybe more. By then the pipes will burst, the roof will fail, and another empty storefront will sit on Harbor Street like a missing tooth." Wyatt said nothing. "There is," Mara continued, "a restoration loan program for small rural businesses, low interest, closely monitored, painfully bureaucratic." "Sounds friendly." "It is not friendly. It is possible." That word changed the air. Not hopeful. Hope was too pretty for the room. But possible had boots on. Possible could shovel snow. Possible did not sing. It showed up with a clipboard and a bad pen. Mara slid a legal pad toward him. "You would need to put down what you can. Not enough, but something. Your truck as secondary collateral. Your veteran's benefit as documented income. You would agree to financial oversight for 2 years. Monthly reporting. No additional borrowing without approval. Repairs prioritized by safety, not sentiment." Wyatt looked at the pad. The numbers were still bad. Less impossible than before, but bad in the way a mountain was bad when you had 1 lung and cheap boots. Mara watched him read. "I should also say this. If you fail, you lose what little you have." "I know." "No, Mr. Bellamy. Men who drift often think losing is clean. It is not. Losing on paper follows you." Wyatt thought of all the things that already followed him without paper. "I know," he said again, quieter. When he came back to the Blue Lantern after 4, the sky had turned pearl gray. Snow moved through the streetlights in soft diagonal lines. The diner's windows glowed yellow, and for one strange second it almost looked warm enough to trust. Lena was outside by the back steps, scraping ice from the rubber mat with a butter knife. "That's a tragic tool choice," Wyatt said. She didn't look up. "It matches the management." He stood at the foot of the steps. "Bank might do it." The knife stopped. Lena turned her head slowly. "Do what?" "Help me buy the place?" Her face went still in a way he did not like. "You're serious," she said. "That keeps coming up." "No." She stood. The wind lifted loose strands of hair around her face. "You don't get to walk into town, see one bad afternoon, and decide you understand what this place is." "I didn't say I understood." "You think this is about Orson being mean, or me needing a rescue? Brightwater doesn't work that way." She pointed the butter knife toward the street, toward the church, the bank, the quiet houses with their clean white roofs. Everybody is tied to everybody. Who rents from who signed what, who needed help during a storm. Roofs. Everybody is tied to everybody. Who rents from who signed what, who needed help during a storm, who looked away because looking directly would cost them something. Wyatt let her speak. Lena's voice lowered. You buy that diner, you don't just buy a grill and some coffee mugs, you buy every string attached to it. I figured there were strings. No, you figured there were knots. Her laugh came sharp. Knots can be untied. The back door opened behind her, and warm air carrying grease and cinnamon slipped into the cold. Orson's voice called from inside. Lena, inventory. She flinched before she could hide it. Wyatt saw. She saw him see. That seemed to anger her more than anything. I'm not afraid of him, she said. I didn't say you were. I'm afraid of the people who still call him a good man. Then she went inside and let the door close between them. Wyatt stayed on the steps until the cold had worked through his boots. That night, after papers had been signed in preliminary ink, and Orson had accepted the terms with a graciousness that made Wyatt want to wash his hands, the blue lantern became his in every way except the ones that mattered. The final transfer would take days, maybe weeks, but Orson handed over a ring of keys with theatrical regret. Don't worry, he said. First month is always inspiring. Oh, then reality develops teeth. Wyatt took the keys. I've met teeth. Orson smiled. Not local ones. He left through the front door, pocket watch chain flashing once beneath the blue sign. Lena finished her shift without congratulating Wyatt. At closing, she wiped the counter, hung her apron, and said only, Don't sleep in the booth under the north window. Draft comes through. Then she left. It was the kindest warning anyone had given him all day. Wyatt made a bed of sorts in the small office behind the kitchen, using a folded moving blanket and his duffel for a pillow. The office smelled of dust, old receipts, and cold coffee. A dented metal desk sat against the wall. File cabinets leaned slightly in one corner. On the floor near the door, Vesper turned 3 times, then refused to lie down. Don't start, Wyatt murmured. Vesper walked down the short back hallway instead. Wyatt followed with a flashlight. Past the dry storage shelves, past the mop sink, at the end of the hall stood an old walk-in cooler that no longer worked. Its metal door had been painted over twice. The handle was rusted. Someone had taped a cardboard sign to it years ago. Out of service. Vesper stood before it, nose close to the seam. He did not scratch, did not bark. He made a low sound in his throat, not warning exactly. Grief maybe, if grief had fur and 4 feet. Wyatt crouched beside him. What is it? The dog leaned against his shoulder. There was no smell of rot, no movement behind the door, nothing dramatic enough to explain the cold that moved along Wyatt's spine. Only the hallway, only the dead cooler, only the sense that fear had once stood here often enough to leave fingerprints. Wyatt returned to the office, but sleep did not come. Around midnight, he opened the desk drawers, partly because he needed something to do, partly because old rooms had a way of talking through what people forgot to take. The top drawer held menus, rubber bands, a broken calculator. The second held unpaid invoices. The third was stuck. Wyatt worked it loose with the small folding knife from his pocket. The drawer jerked open so suddenly that papers slid forward and hit the floor. At the back, behind a stack of stained order pads, sat a narrow metal box. No lock, no label. Inside were files. Employee records or something pretending to be. Names written on tabs, some in black ink, some crossed through in red. Beside several names were handwritten amounts, each one marked as debt. uniform fee, room advance, meal balance, damaged equipment, transport, winter assistance. Wyatt sat back in the office chair, the blue light from the diner sign pulsing faintly through the small window behind him. Vesper rested his chin on Wyatt's knee. Wyatt turned one page, then another. The amounts were too neat to be mistakes. The names were too many to be accidents. And for the first time since asking to buy the Blue Lantern, Wyatt understood that the diner had not merely been cold. It had been keeping accounts of who was allowed to be warm. The first thing Wyatt changed was the light, not the sign outside. That old blue lantern still flickered over Harbor Street like a stubborn ghost refusing retirement. He left it alone for the time being. There was something honest about its uneven glow, something that suited the place better than polished brightness would have. Inside, though, the diner had been living under yellow bulbs, so tired they made eggs look suspicious and coffee look like a legal threat. Wyatt stood on a chair before sunrise, twisting out one dead bulb after another, while Vesper watched from beneath the counter with the grave patience of a supervisor who did not believe in ladders. "You could help," Wyatt said. Vesper blinked. "Right. Management?" Lena arrived just after 6, pushing through the front door with snow in her hair and her cardigan buttoned wrong. She stopped when she saw the windows. Wyatt had washed them before the streetlights went off. Not perfectly. There were still streaks where the rag had frozen in his hand, and one corner bore a stubborn smear of old grease, but the lake was visible now. Pale winter light came across the frozen water and entered the Blue Lantern like a guest who had once been insulted and was considering forgiveness. Lena said nothing at first, then she set down her bag and looked at him. "You cleaned the windows." "Seemed cheaper than therapy." "For you or the diner?" "Yes." That made her mouth twitch. It was not friendship, not yet. Friendship was a house, and they were still standing outside with no key. But the air between them had changed from barbed wire to something more like a fence with a gate. Wyatt knew how to fix hinges. He knew how to level a table by folding cardboard under the short leg. He knew how to listen to a stove and tell whether it was dying immediately or simply making dramatic statements. What he did not know was how to run a diner. Lena knew. She knew which regular wanted decaf, but would deny it if asked aloud. She knew the postal woman liked her toast nearly burnt. She knew the 2 old men in caps would complain if the coffee was fresh because they preferred it bitter enough to punish them. She knew the cash register had to be slapped on the left side, never the right, and that the pie case light flickered only when someone opened the back door too hard. She also knew the espresso machine, though the Blue Lantern had no business owning one. "It sounds like a helicopter falling into a lake," Wyatt said the first time he turned it on. "That's because you're scaring it." "It's a machine." "So are some people." "Doesn't mean they don't get scared." She came around the counter, moved his hand from the lever, and showed him the proper angle. Her fingers were small and quick, the nails cut short. On her right wrist, just above the cuff, he noticed a faint red mark where skin had been rubbed raw by wet fabric. He looked away before she saw him seeing. By noon, they had replaced 3 bulbs, moved 2 booths so customers could see the lake, taped a crack in the vinyl near the counter, and thrown away a stack of menus sticky with old syrup. Vesper claimed the space beside the small gas stove near the front door, not quite sleeping, not quite guarding. People came in and noticed him first. Some smiled without meaning to. "Dog yours?" asked the postal woman, whose name, according to Lena, was B. Wyatt nodded. "Good-looking animal." Vesper opened one eye, accepting the compliment as overdue. "Does he bite?" "Only reputations," Lena said from the coffee station. B laughed into her mug. It should have felt like progress. For a few hours, it almost did. Then Wyatt found himself looking at the metal box again. It sat in the office under the desk, exactly where he had put it the night before. He had told himself he would wait. He had lights to change, suppliers to call, a loan packet to sign, a health inspection checklist that made him wonder if civilization had been a clerical error. But the box had weight, not physical weight, the other kind. The kind a room develops when something in it knows more than you do. After closing, Lena stayed to count the register. Wyatt carried the box out and set it on the counter between them. Her hands stopped moving. "You looked through it?" she asked. "Some." "And?" "There are names." Her face changed before she could stop it. Wyatt opened the lid. File tabs stared up in uneven rows. Some names written carefully. Some crossed out so hard in red ink the paper had torn. Lena did not touch them. Wyatt pulled one file free. Martha Lean, owed for room advance, uniforms, meals, and transport. "She worked here one winter," Lena said softly. "Before me?" "Where'd she go?" "Don't know. People leave." He pulled another. "Cal Rusk, damaged equipment, $380. Lena's eyes dropped. "He was sleeping in his truck. Orson let him use the storage garage during a storm. Then the snowblower broke. Cal said it was already broken." "Was it?" "Everything here was already broken." Wyatt turned another page. More names, some with notes, some with photocopied signatures, some with payment schedules, some marked settled, others marked abandoned. Men who had drifted in looking for winter work. Women who had needed a room for a month and stayed trapped for 6. A cook who had left after signing a repayment agreement for food he had supposedly stolen. A dishwasher charged for gloves, aprons, and training time. A veteran from Wisconsin who owed for behavioral disruption after refusing a double shift. The words were tidy. That was what made them ugly. Cruelty shouted in movies. In life, it often used columns. Lena reached for one file, then pulled her hand back. Wyatt noticed. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She took the file from his hand and opened it with the expression of someone lifting the lid off a coffin she had paid rent on. Her own name was not in that stack, not in the box, but she spoke as if it were. "There's another cabinet," she said. Orson kept current employees separate. Wyatt waited. "The freezer door?" she said. "The broken one?" "It was broken before I started. Everybody knew that. You had to lift it before shutting, or it wouldn't seal. One night, big storm, power flickering, Orson told me to inventory the back. I closed it wrong. Next morning, he said the compressor burned out because of me." "Did it?" "No." "Ipadrig, no, different man, local repair guy, said the unit was dying anyway, but Orson had a paper. Estimate, replacement cost, my signature under a repayment agreement." "Why sign?" Lena looked at the window. Outside, the lake was black glass under a white moon. "Because it was February. Because the room over the garage had heat that worked sometimes. Because he said if I didn't sign, I could find another job and another place by morning." She gave a small laugh with no humor in it. "You ever try apartment hunting during a blizzard with $42? Wyatt had tried worse. Different names. Same God. "No," he said. She looked at him then, surprised by the mercy of the lie. "My debt never shrinks," she said. "Every time I get close, there's a fee, a repair, a missed meal charge, interest he says I agreed to. I don't even know what I owe anymore." Wyatt slid the files back into the box. The diner around them seemed newly visible, the patched stools, the old cooler door, the stove, the mop sink, the office where debts had slept in drawers. He had thought he bought a sick business. Now it felt more like he had bought a mouth that had been fed on people. The next morning, Wyatt took the box to Mara Ellison. He did not tell Lena until afterward. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because he knew if he asked permission, she would say no to protect herself, and if he went without telling her, she could truthfully say she had not sent him. Mara's office looked exactly as it had before, except this time Vesper was invited inside without discussion. The dog lay by the door, head on his paws, eyes tracking Mara as she opened the first file. Wyatt expected surprise. He got stillness. Mara read 3 files, then a 4th. She removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, though they did not appear dirty. "You knew," Wyatt said. "No." "Close enough." Her jaw tightened. "I suspected pieces." "That's a politician answer." "I am a banker. We make politicians look emotionally available." He almost smiled. Almost. Mara closed the file. "Orson did not invent this." Wyatt felt something in his stomach settle heavily. "Explain." "There is a fund, Brightwater Winter Relief. It was created 12 years ago after 2 people nearly froze in a stalled car north of town. Officially, it helps stranded workers, temporary laborers, people between housing, travelers, and emergency situations. Food vouchers, short-term rooms, fuel, clothing." "Officially," Mara nodded. "The fund pays local vendors directly, restaurants, landlords, mechanics, hardware suppliers. In theory, it keeps people alive through winter." "And in practice?" "In practice, some vendors bill the fund, then also bill the person receiving help. They call it a gap, a deposit, a behavior bond, a work exchange. The language changes depending on who is desperate." Wyatt looked down at the names in red. "So the town gets paid for kindness twice." Mara did not answer immediately. The silence did. "How many people?" he asked. "I don't know." "You're the bank." "I am not the town's conscience." "No," Wyatt said, "just one of its safes." That hit harder than he meant it to. Mara's face did not break, but color rose faintly along her cheekbones. Vesper lifted his head. Then he meant it to. Mara's face did not break, but color rose faintly along her cheekbones. Vesper lifted his head. For a moment, Wyatt thought Mara would tell him to leave. Instead, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out a folder with no label. "I began keeping copies when the numbers stopped making sense," she said. "Not enough to accuse, enough to worry." Wyatt stared at the folder. "Why didn't you do something?" Mara's eyes were pale winter water. "Because every person who might testify was either gone, ashamed, afraid of losing housing, or made to look unreliable. Because Orson was only one vendor. Because Deputy Coe sits on the advisory board. Because the church collects donations for the fund. Because in small towns, corruption does not wear a mask. It brings casseroles when your mother dies." The sentence stayed in the room like smoke. Wyatt thought of Lena signing a paper in a storm, of red ink through names, of the old cooler door that made Vesper grieve. When he returned to the Blue Lantern, a man was standing outside with a tin cup in both hands. He was tall once, Wyatt guessed, though age and weather had folded him slightly. His beard was white and uneven. A green canvas jacket hung from his shoulders, its elbows dark with old grease. Beside the curb sat a van, the color of dull oatmeal, patched with primer and hope. The man did not come in. He stood near the window, reading the taped paper Lena had put up that morning. "Open under new ownership." Vesper saw him through the glass and rose. This time the dog did not move like a guard. He moved like someone recognizing a road he had once walked. Wyatt opened the door. "You need something?" The man's eyes flicked to him, then away. "Hot water, if it's no trouble." "For tea?" "For hands." Wyatt stepped aside. "Come in." The man hesitated. People who had been charged for warmth learned caution around open doors. Lena came from behind the counter. "It's all right." The man looked at her. Something old and embarrassed passed over his face. "Frank?" she asked. He gave a small shrug. "Depends who's asking." "Lena? I was new here when you used to fix the griddle. Griddle never did appreciate me. Vesper walked to Frank and sat beside him, close enough that the man could feel the heat of his body, but not so close as to demand touch. Frank looked down. "Well," he said softly, "that's a polite wolf." "He's management," Wyatt said. Frank's mouth shifted under the beard. "Explains the service?" Lena brought him a bowl of soup without asking. Not water. Soup. Steam rose from it, carrying the smell of onions, carrots, pepper, and something that made the whole room feel less accused. Frank stared at the bowl. "I asked for water." "I heard wrong," Lena said. "I can't pay." "Nobody asked yet." He sat at the counter slowly, as if expecting the stool to object. Vesper lay at his feet. Wyatt watched the old man wrap both hands around the bowl. Not eating yet, just holding it, taking warmth through ceramic before trusting it through his mouth. That was when Wyatt remembered the file. Frank Arlen, crossed out in red, damaged tools, room balance, meal debt, disorderly conduct, $216. Wyatt took the file from the office and laid it on the counter beside him. Frank looked at it once and closed his eyes. "I don't want trouble," he said, not offering any. "They said I owed—" "Maybe I did." Lena's voice was quiet. "Did you?" Frank rubbed his thumb along a crack in the bowl. "I fixed the griddle, the toaster, the back sink, and the heater in Orson's office. Slept 3 weeks in that van during the cold snap. He let me eat end pieces of pie and soup left from lunch. Then one day he said I had a tab." He opened his eyes. "I was tired, signed what he put in front of me so he'd stop talking." The diner had 3 other customers then. All local, all listening without looking like they were listening. Frank pushed the bowl slightly away. "You keeping books like that?" "No," Wyatt said. "You sure?" Wyatt looked at the red line through Frank's name. Then he took the file, tore it in half, and dropped the pieces into the trash. Lena inhaled sharply. Frank stared. Wyatt knew it was not legally clean, knew paper had copies, debts had shadows, and gestures did not dismantle systems. But some small kings had to be dethroned in public before anyone believed the empire could tremble. "The soup's free," Wyatt said. "But if you know how to make that coffee machine stop screaming, I'll listen." Frank looked at him for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he pulled the bowl back. "Machine's not screaming," he said. "It's begging for a gasket." Vesper sighed and put his head on Frank's boot. The old man's hand lowered, uncertain, then rested on the dog's gray cream head. For the first time since Wyatt had opened the box, the diner did not feel like a trap pretending to be warm. It felt like a place deciding what warmth would cost. And maybe, if they were careful, if they were brave in small, unglamorous ways, the answer could be nothing that stole a person's name. The sign was Lena's idea in the end, though she later denied it with the moral certainty of a woman refusing responsibility for a crime committed by soup. Wyatt had written the first version on a piece of cardboard torn from a produce box. "Hot soup, free if needed." Lena read it, frowned, and took the marker from his hand. "That sounds like a trap." "It's soup. In Brightwater, even soup can have paperwork." She turned the cardboard over and wrote in cleaner letters, "Hot soup. Pay what you can." Then, under that, smaller, "Or don't. Sit down anyway." Wyatt studied the sign. "Guillaume, that last part feels financially reckless. You bought a diner with a dying stove and a haunted paperwork drawer." "Fair." They taped the sign inside the front window where the morning light could catch it. Outside, snow fell in bright little flakes. Not storm snow, not yet. But the pretty kind tourists liked to photograph before it became everyone's backache. The lake beyond Harbor Street lay frozen under a smooth sheet of white blue, and the town looked peaceful enough to be lying. Vesper took his place beneath the window as if the sign required a guard. He did not bark at anyone. He simply lay there, gray cream fur brushed by the draft under the door, lantern-shaped tag resting against his collar, amber eyes following boots that passed outside. The first hour, no one came in because of the sign. The second hour, Frank Arlen entered through the door with a toolbox in one hand and a look of suspicion in the other. "I'm here about the coffee machine," he announced, as if defending himself in court. Lena leaned over the counter. "Good morning to you too, Frank." "Morning is an accusation." Wyatt slid a bowl of soup toward him. "Payment advance." Frank looked at the bowl. "You paying me in carrots?" "There's onion in there, too." "Don't get greedy." Frank made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had lived an easier life. He sat, opened his red metal toolbox, and began arranging little wrenches beside the bowl with priestly care. By noon, the sign had drawn in a woman driving a freight route from Duluth to Thunder Bay, her hair tucked under a knit cap, her eyelids heavy from road glare. She paid with $6, 2 Canadian quarters, and a packet of peppermint gum, which Lena accepted solemnly as if it were legal tender. An elderly couple came next. Their sedan had thrown a belt 3 miles outside town, and the husband kept apologizing for bringing snow onto the floor, though the floor had known worse enemies. They paid by washing mugs, moving slowly at the sink together, shoulder to shoulder, like two old trees leaning the same direction. A man in a paint-spattered jacket offered to chop wood from the stack behind the diner. A college-age woman, no, Wyatt corrected himself, not college-age, late 20s perhaps, small and sharp-eyed, left a 20 under an empty bowl and vanished before Lena could say, "Thank you." By the third day, the lunch rush had become something the Blue Lantern had not seen in years. Unpredictable. People who could pay did. Some paid too much and pretended not to. People who could not pay folded napkins, shoveled the front walk, tightened chair legs, swept the back hall, or simply sat with both hands around a bowl and looked ashamed until Vesper came to rest his head near their boots. Wyatt did not know what to do with the shame at first. He wanted to remove it like a splinter. But shame did not come out clean when pulled. Sometimes it had to dissolve in warmth, slowly, without anyone staring. So he learned not to say, "Don't worry about it." He learned to say, "More coffee?" Lena watched this change in him with an expression he could not read. She still teased him. Old not read. She still teased him. She still corrected him when he wrote orders in handwriting that looked like barbed wire. But she no longer moved through the diner like a person waiting for a hand to close around the back of her neck. One afternoon, while Frank lay half under the espresso machine, muttering about gaskets and Italian drama, Lena placed a folded receipt beside Wyatt. "What's this?" he asked. "Math? Cruel. We're losing money on soup." "I suspected soup was treacherous." She crossed her arms. "I'm serious." "So am I. Soup has been looking at me funny." "Wyatt." He looked up. Her face had gone steady, but not cold. That was new, too. So, with Orson, steadiness had been armor. Now it looked more like ground under her feet. "You can't feed half the highway on good intentions." "I know." "Do you?" He glanced around the diner. Frank's boots stuck out from beneath the machine. Vesper watched a man near the window break his roll in half and slip one piece into his coat pocket for later. B from the post office sat at the counter, pretending not to cry while reading a letter. Wyatt lowered his voice. "I know exactly how long good intentions last when the money runs out." Lena softened by one breath. "I'm not asking you to stop," she said. "I'm asking you to count." So they counted. After closing, they sat at the counter with receipts spread between them, 2 mugs of coffee going cold. Lena showed him how much a pot of soup cost if they used bones from the butcher, bruised vegetables from the market, and yesterday's bread for thickening. Wyatt showed her how much he could save by fixing the back heater himself instead of calling a contractor. Frank, who had fallen asleep sitting upright in a booth, woke long enough to say, "Charge rich people extra for toast." "That is not a business model," Lena said. "It's justice with butter." Vesper sighed in agreement. For a moment, the diner felt almost light. That was when Deputy Harlan Coe came in. He did not enter like a villain. He entered like a weather report everyone already feared. Tall, broad through the chest, with a trimmed gray mustache and a tan sheriff's department jacket zipped high, he brought cold air with him and an expression of practiced neighborliness. His badge was not polished bright, but it did not need to be. In a town like Brightwater, authority did not shine. It settled. "Evening," he said. Lena's hand paused over the receipts. Wyatt stood from the stool. "Deputy?" "Harlan Coe." He offered his hand. "I don't think we've been properly introduced." His grip was firm without being aggressive. That was worse somehow. Aggression at least had the honesty to show its teeth. "Wyatt Bellamy?" "I know." Of course he did. Harlan looked around the diner. His gaze touched the sign in the window, Frank asleep in the booth, Vesper by the stove, the stack of donated coats someone had left near the door. "Place looks different?" That was the hope. "Hope is good?" Harlan smiled. "Until it starts attracting problems." Wyatt said nothing. "We've had some calls," Harlan continued. "Concerns, folks hanging around, people nobody recognizes, vehicles parked too long. You understand? Winter brings all types through." "Hungry types?" "Sometimes hungry, sometimes not." Lena spoke before Wyatt could. "Everyone who comes in here is served inside. Nobody's bothering the street." Harlan turned to her with the gentle patience of a man accustomed to women lowering their eyes. "Lena, I'm glad you're doing well with the change. Truly, but public safety isn't personal." Her face tightened, but she did not look away. Wyatt felt heat rise in him, old and quick. Then Lena's foot pressed lightly against his under the counter. Not hard, just enough. A warning, a request. Do not become what they are waiting for. Wyatt let the heat pass through him without giving it a weapon. "We'll keep the sidewalk clear," he said. Harlan looked back at him. Something like disappointment flickered in his eyes, as if he had hoped for a louder man. "Good," the deputy said. "I'd hate for the town to misunderstand what you're trying to do here." When he left, the bell over the door rang too brightly. Frank opened one eye. "That man's smile wears boots." Lena laughed once, softly, then covered her mouth as if the laugh might be used against her. The town's discomfort did not stay polite for long. The next morning, Eloise Grant came in, wearing a white wool coat with a fur-trimmed hood and earrings shaped like tiny gold leaves. She owned 3 rental buildings in Brightwater and carried herself like someone who believed property lines were a form of scripture. She did not order. She stood by the counter and looked at Lena as if inspecting a stain. "My tenants have been asking questions," Eloise said. Lena poured coffee into a mug that did not need pouring. "People do that." "About old balances, receipts, assistance forms." Eloise's eyes shifted to Wyatt. "I hope you aren't encouraging confusion." Wyatt wiped his hands on a towel. "I encourage reading before signing." "How admirable." Her smile was thin enough to cut paper. "Signing?" "How admirable." Her smile was thin enough to cut paper. "Some people become very bold when someone else is paying for their breakfast." Vesper lifted his head. Wyatt looked at the dog. "Stay." Eloise glanced down, and for all her white wool elegance, she took half a step back. The real ugliness came that evening. Lena found it on the back door when she took out the trash. A photocopy of her old repayment agreement had been taped to the peeling paint. Across it, in thick black marker, someone had written, "She always lived off other people." For a moment, she made no sound. Wyatt saw the paper over her shoulder. Something inside him moved so fast it almost had hands. He reached for it. Lena caught his wrist. No. Her grip was small, stronger than he expected. "I'm taking it down." "I know." "Then let go." "No." He turned toward her. Snow blew in loose circles under the backlight. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard, bright, alive with something larger than shame. "If you make this your fight," she said, "they win." "They already made it yours." "They made it mine years ago. That's not new." Her fingers tightened. "This town knows how to turn a tired woman into a liar and an angry man into a danger. Don't hand them the second half." The words struck him with the force of a bell. For years, Wyatt had believed restraint meant leaving. Let people keep their rooms. Let trouble keep its name. Let the road open and take him before he made anything worse. But Lena was asking for a different kind of restraint. Stay. Do not explode. Think. It was harder than anger. Anger was a match. This was a hearth. He lowered his hand. Lena took the paper down herself, folded it once, then again, each crease clean. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She stared at the folded paper. Then she looked toward the warm square of light spilling from the diner windows onto the snow. "I want dinner," she said. Wyatt blinked. "That's either brave or low blood sugar." "I want everyone invited. Bring food if they have it. A story if they don't. If they have it. A story if they don't. Or nothing. Just come in and sit down." "You sure?" "No." She tucked the folded paper into her apron pocket. "That's how I know it's probably right." The storm came 2 nights later, and so did the town. Not all of it, not even half, but enough. Snow hammered the windows and softened the street lights into pale halos. Inside the blue lantern, every table was full. Someone brought a pot of venison stew. Bea brought biscuits wrapped in a towel. The freight driver returned with a pan of cinnamon rolls from a truck stop. The elderly couple whose car belt had snapped brought pickled beets in a jar and apologized for the jar, which everyone agreed was unnecessary because the beets were heroic. Frank told a story about fixing a tractor during a blizzard in 1989, turning the tale into an epic involving frozen bolts, betrayal by a wrench, and a cow named Margaret, who apparently had opinions about diesel fuel. Vesper stole half a roll from an unattended plate. The whole room saw. The dog froze, bread in mouth, amber eyes wide with the innocence of a saint caught robbing a bakery. Lena pointed at him. Management is taking quality control seriously. Laughter moved through the diner, not loud at first, then fuller, rising into the rafters like something that had been trapped there and finally remembered wings. Wyatt stood near the end of the counter, watching Lena. She was not hiding behind work now. She moved among the tables, yes, refilling cups, clearing plates, but her shoulders were not folded inward. When someone thanked her, she did not flinch. When Bea touched her arm, she did not pull away. At one point, Lena climbed onto a chair to adjust a strand of lights Frank had hung crookedly above the pie case. The room looked up, not because she was in danger, because she was there, saw fully there. And Wyatt felt with a strange ache behind his ribs that some people did not need rescuing from a tower. Sometimes they needed the floor beneath them to stop moving. Near the end of the night, when the storm had thickened and the windows were blank with snow, a woman Wyatt did not recognize sat alone at the last booth by the coat rack. She wore a dark hat pulled low and a green scarf wrapped high over her mouth. She did not eat much, She listened more than she spoke. When Wyatt carried coffee to her table, she kept her gloved hands around the mug and did not look up. "You need anything else?" he asked. "No," she said. Her voice was older than her posture. "You've already got too much." Before he could answer, Frank called from the counter that the coffee machine was making that opera noise again, and Wyatt turned away. When he looked back, the booth was empty. Only a plain brown envelope remained beneath the saucer. No name, no note. Inside was not money. Wyatt opened it behind the counter, while Lena stood close enough for their shoulders to nearly touch. Mara Ellison's name appeared on one page, not as sender, but as someone present at a meeting. Deputy Harlan Coe's name appeared twice. Orson Pike's name appeared under vendor reimbursements. The papers were copies of meeting minutes from the Brightwater Winter Relief Fund. On the final page was a list of people who had supposedly received emergency aid. Frank Arlen, Martha Lean, Cal Rusk, Lena Hart. Wyatt felt the diner's warmth fall away from his skin. Beside Lena's name was an amount large enough to cover a year of rent, meals, heating, and wages. Lena stared at it. "I never got that," she said. Her voice was calm in the way ice was calm just before it cracked. Across the room, Vesper lay beside the stove, his head resting on his paws, eyes open. Outside, the storm kept covering Brightwater in white. Inside, under the blue lantern's trembling light, the Truth had found a table and sat down. The morning after the envelope appeared, the blue lantern did not feel like a diner. It felt like a room holding its breath. Coffee brewed. Bacon hissed. Frank argued with the repaired espresso machine as if the two of them had survived a war together and were now in a difficult marriage. Bea from the post office came in for toast and tried, unsuccessfully, not to stare at Lena. Everything looked ordinary. That was the trouble. Wyatt had learned long ago that danger rarely entered with drums. Sometimes it sat at a counter, ordered eggs, and asked how the roads were. Sometimes it wore a deputy's jacket. Sometimes it sat on the advisory board of a charity fund and smiled for photographs beside boxes of donated coats. The papers from the brown envelope lay in a folder under the counter between a stack of napkins and a half-empty roll of receipt tape. Lena kept glancing at it. Not often, not obviously. But Wyatt saw it each time. Her eyes would move there, touch the drawer, then return to the coffee mugs, the plates, the customers. She was trying to work around the knowledge that somewhere, on clean paper with official headings, her name had been used to collect money she had never received. At 10, Mara Ellison entered through the front door. She wore her charcoal coat and carried a leather satchel tight against her side. Snow dusted the shoulders of her coat, but none clung long. Mara had the air of a woman even winter hesitated to inconvenience. Vesper lifted his head from beside the stove. Mara looked at him. "Good morning." The dog blinked once. Wyatt said, "That's the warmest greeting he gives bankers." "I'll treasure it." Lena locked the front door after Bea left. Frank turned the sign to closed with an exaggerated sigh. "We closed for a bank meeting?" he asked. "I wore my worst hat." "You only have one hat," Lena said. "Exactly. Worst by default." Mara did not smile this time. Not smile this time. She spread the pages across the cleanest table near the back. Meeting minutes, vendor reimbursement lists, check numbers, emergency assistance summaries, donation reports from the church, a county grant statement, receipts from the Blue Lantern under Orson's ownership, rental invoices from Eloise Grant's properties, repair bills from a mechanic Wyatt had not yet met. All of it looked tidy. That was what made it monstrous. No blood on the paper, no threats, no bruises, just signatures, stamps, initials, and columns. Mara tapped one sheet with a silver pen. The Winter Relief Fund received 3 main sources of money: private donations, mostly through the church. SOAR, see contributions from tourism businesses that wanted good publicity. And a county hardship grant for winter emergency response. Sounds noble, Frank muttered. It was, Mara said. At first. She moved another page forward. Then the fund stopped paying individuals directly. The board said giving cash was risky. They began paying vendors instead. Restaurants, landlords, mechanics, hardware stores, fuel suppliers. Lena stood with both hands on the back of a chair. So if someone needed help, the money went to people like Orson. Yes. And then Orson charged the person too. Mara's eyes lowered for half a second. In some cases, yes. Frank leaned forward. Some cases? Mara did not defend the phrase. Many. Wyatt looked at the page listing Lena's name. The amount beside it still made his teeth tighten. Emergency lodging support, meal assistance, heating stabilization, employment retention, words soft as blankets, used like ropes. Lena never saw this money, Wyatt said. No, Mara replied. Lena let out a small sound, not a sob, not a laugh, something stranded between them. Employment retention, she said. That's a pretty name for being too broke to leave. No one answered. Outside, the snow brightened. A plow passed slowly, scraping the street with a metallic groan. The sound moved through the diner like an animal dragging chains. Mara took off her glasses and cleaned them, though Wyatt had begun to understand the habit was less about vision than courage. There's more, she said. Of course there is, Frank said. Paper breeds in drawers. Mara turned another sheet. When someone questioned a balance, the vendor could file a behavior report with the fund. The report could mark the recipient as non-compliant, unstable, intoxicated, aggressive, or unsuitable for further assistance. Lena's hand tightened on the chair. Wyatt looked at her. Did Orson ever? Yes. She did not let him finish. Her face stayed calm, but it was a hard-won calm, built beam by beam over a pit. He said I was emotionally volatile after I argued about the freezer door. He wrote that I had a pattern of dishonesty because I asked for copies of what I signed. He said I was at risk of abandoning employment. Frank's voice came low from the booth. They did that to Cal Rusk, too. Called him disruptive. Man had a busted tooth and pneumonia. Hard to be charming when your lungs sound like wet gravel. Mara pulled one more page from her satchel. This is why people did not fight it. If the fund marked them non-compliant, landlords could refuse them. Employers could refuse them. The church would stop referring help. And the county shelter 2 towns over sometimes checked the list. Wyatt stared at her. They built a weatherproof cage. Mara looked at him. Yes, she said, and called it mercy. For the first time that morning, Lena sat down. Vesper rose from his place by the stove and crossed to her. He did not put his head in her lap. He did not perform comfort like a trick. He simply sat beside her chair, close enough that his shoulder touched her knee. Lena's fingers found the thick fur between his ears. I thought I was stupid, she said. The room went still. I thought maybe I signed the wrong thing because I didn't read carefully enough, or maybe I owed more than I remembered. Or maybe everyone else understood life better than I did. She looked at the papers. That's the clever part, isn't it? They make the cage out of your own handwriting. Wyatt felt something in him bend, not break, bend toward her. He wanted, with a violence that frightened him, to take every page, every signature, every polite lie, and feed it into the stove until the whole town smelled its own smoke. Instead, he sat across from her. You weren't stupid. She looked at him. He expected her to deflect. Make a joke. Tell him not to start sounding like a pamphlet. But she only nodded once. That nod was smaller than forgiveness and larger than denial. It was the first coin dropped into a well that might someday become trust. By afternoon, the practical fear arrived. It came in Mara's voice. If this becomes public too soon, files may disappear. Vendors will claim clerical error. Orson will say individual debts were separate from fund assistance. Harlan will call it a public misunderstanding. Eloise will threaten eviction against anyone still in her buildings. Can she do that? Lena asked. Legally? Not cleanly? Practically? She can make life miserable before anyone stops her. Frank rubbed his beard. So we sit on it? No, Mara said, but we move carefully. Wyatt walked to the window. Shachti, across the street, Mulligan's bar had its lunch crowd. Through the frosted glass he could see shapes moving, men in dark coats, elbows on counters, heads tipped together. Orson Pike was probably among them, smiling into a glass, letting other people be angry for him. The road west out of Brightwater lay beyond the edge of town. Wyatt knew exactly where it was. His body knew. His truck knew. Some part of him had never stopped facing that direction. He turned back to the table. If this goes wrong, he said, Lena gets hurt first. I'm already in it, Lena said, more than you are now. Her eyes sharpened. Don't make me smaller to make your fear look noble. The sentence struck clean. Frank whistled softly. That one had boots. Wyatt almost smiled, but could not hold it. After Mara left with copies in her satchel and a plan beginning to form behind her careful eyes, Wyatt went out to the truck. He told himself he needed to check the oil. The hood was cold under his hand. Snow had gathered along the windshield. The old pickup sat at the curb like a loyal bad idea, packed with the remains of a life designed for escape. Duffel bag, blanket, toolbox, spare leash, road atlas with pages creased from Ohio to Montana. He opened the driver's door, not to leave, not exactly, just to feel the option. Vesper came out of the diner behind him. The dog walked around the front of the truck and sat directly in the road-facing path of the open door. Move, Wyatt said. Vesper did not. Don't start managing me in public. The dog looked up, amber eyes steady, ears lifted against the snow. Wyatt let out a breath that smoked in the air. I'm not leaving. Vesper remained seated. I said I'm not. From behind him, Lena's voice came dry and tired and almost kind. Your dog is exhausted from doing all your conscience work. Wyatt turned. She stood on the sidewalk in her cardigan, arms crossed tight against the cold. Snow caught in her hair. Her face held no smile, but there was warmth in the corner of her eyes. Wyatt looked back at Vesper. The dog still had not moved. He's unionizing, Wyatt said. Good. Someone should. The line should have been funny. It was funny. But beneath it lay the plain hard thing neither of them could joke away. Wyatt looked at the truck's open door, then at the diner, then at Lena. I have a habit, he said. Of insulting coffee machines? Of leaving before trouble knows my full name. Lena's expression changed, softened not into pity, but into recognition. That worked? No. Vesper finally stood. Not because Wyatt had commanded it, because something had been answered. That evening they gathered around the back table again. Lena, Wyatt, Mara, and Frank. The diner was closed, the front lights dimmed, the stove clicking as it cooled. Vesper lay beneath the table with his head on Wyatt's boot and one paw on Lena's shoe, as if making sure both humans stayed accounted for. They did not plan revenge. That would have been easier. Revenge was simple enough for a drunk to understand. What they needed was protection. Lena spoke first. People won't testify in an office, she said. Not to a banker, not to the county, not if they think their names will be written down and used against them again. Mara nodded. Likely true. They might talk here. Wyatt looked at her. At the diner? At a winter story night, Lena said. Not a hearing. Aye, true. They might talk here. Wyatt looked at her. At the diner? At a winter story night, Lena said. Not a hearing, not a protest. We invite people to come tell what winter costs them. They can use names or not. They can talk about work, rent, food, cars, anything. We record only with permission. Frank scratched his beard. Folks like stories better than statements. Stories are harder to dismiss, Lena said. Mara leaned back. If we do this, we need copies of everything sent outside Brightwater before the event. A reporter, the county prosecutor's office, maybe legal aid. Can you do that? Wyatt asked. Mara's mouth tightened. Yes. You could lose your job. I know. No drama in it, just a fact placed on the table beside the salt shaker. Frank lifted one hand. I can make the old speaker system work. Maybe, if the wires aren't a rat cathedral. They are, Lena said. Then I shall negotiate with the clergy. For the first time all day they laughed, small, tired, but real. Wyatt looked around the table, a waitress with an old debt folded in her pocket, a banker who had kept copies when courage was not yet big enough to act, a mechanic who had been crossed out in red and still knew how to fix broken things. A dog who believed a doorway was not just an exit, but a question, and himself. A man who had mistaken motion for freedom for so long that standing still felt like stepping off a cliff. Later, after Lena went upstairs to the little room over the garage, and Frank slept in his van behind the diner because he said the alley had good wind manners, Wyatt walked down to the dock alone. Lake Superior lay under moonlit ice, vast and white and unspeaking. Snow covered the planks. The town behind him glowed in warm squares of window light. Orson Pike was waiting near the end of the dock. His camel coat was buttoned neatly. His shoes were wrong for snow, but polished anyway. The gold chain of his pocket watch curved across his vest like a smile that had learned to lie. Beautiful night, Orson said. Wyatt stopped several feet away. Cold? That too. Neither man moved. Orson looked out over the lake. You know, men like you are always easy to spot. Bad coat? No, hunger. Orson's voice stayed gentle. You want the world to give you one clean fight, one door to kick in, one villain to drag into the street. That way, you never have to look too closely at why you need saving to be your profession. Wyatt said nothing. Orson turned his head. You think you're helping Lena? Frank? The sad parade at your counter? He smiled faintly. You're using them, same as anyone. You need them wounded so you can feel useful. The words found old rooms in Wyatt. Rooms he had not swept. Faces he had failed. Places he had left. The part of him that feared Orson was right because cruelty sometimes borrowed the shape of truth to get inside. Orson stepped closer. This town was here before you drove in, Mr. Bellamy. It will be here after you leave, and you will leave. The wind crossed the dock, lifting snow around their boots. Wyatt looked past Orson to the frozen lake, pale under the moon, like a sleeping god with no interest in human paperwork. Then he looked back. For once, he did not defend himself. He did not threaten. He did not explain his goodness to a man who would only turn it into a handle. He simply stood there. Orson's smile faded by a fraction. Wyatt said nothing. And for the first time in a very long time, silence did not mean surrender. It meant he was still there. By 6 o'clock, the snow had made Brightwater beautiful enough to be forgiven by strangers. It softened the roofs, blurred the alleys, covered the tire marks on Harbor Street, and turned the frozen lake into a pale mirror for the moon. From the outside, the town looked like a Christmas card forgotten in a drawer. Church steeple, warm windows, blue shadows under the eaves. Only those who lived there knew how much could hide beneath white. The blue lantern glowed at the corner like a small ship refusing to sink. Its old sign buzzed and flickered, then held steady, blue light spilling over the sidewalk and touching the falling snow. Inside, Wyatt had pushed the tables closer together. Frank had coaxed the ancient speaker system back to life with wire, tape, prayer, and language that made Lena tell him the coffee urn was more polite than he was. "It had more advantages growing up," Frank said. Vesper lay near the front door, gray-cream body stretched beside the stove, head up, eyes watchful. His lantern tag rested against his collar. Every time someone stepped inside and hesitated, he gave one slow sweep of his tail against the floorboards. Not excitement. Permission. That was what Wyatt saw again and again. People did not enter as if arriving at an event. They entered as if crossing a line they had been warned about. A woman kept her scarf over her mouth even after sitting down. A man with a mechanic's hands stood near the pie case for 10 minutes before accepting coffee. Bea from the post office came with a notebook she never opened. The freight driver from Duluth arrived in the same knit cap, cheeks red from the road, carrying a thermos and the wary look of a woman used to sleeping lightly. Some came because they were angry. Some came because they were afraid. Some came because silence had finally grown heavier than speech. Wyatt stood behind the counter in his red and black plaid coat, though the diner was warm enough without it. He kept the coffee moving. That was something he could do. Fill mugs. Clear plates. Make sure no one had to ask twice for sugar, water, or the door. Lena stood near the old microphone Frank had set on a table by the window. She wore her pale blue diner dress and cream cardigan. Her hair was tied back, the small silver bird clip holding it neatly at the side. There was nothing grand about her. No dramatic dress, no raised platform, no heroic light. Just Lena, with both hands wrapped around a sheet of paper she did not look at. Mara sat near the back, satchel by her feet, coat folded over her lap. She had chosen a table where she could see the whole room and the door at once. Wyatt recognized the habit. Nigh the habit. People who expected consequences learned where exits were. Frank tested the microphone. A shriek of feedback cut through the room. Vesper lifted his head sharply. Frank winced. Good news. It works and hates us. A few people laughed, not loudly. Enough? Lena looked toward Wyatt. He nodded once. She stepped to the microphone. The room quieted in layers. First the spoons stopped, then the cups. Then the small shuffling sounds of people preparing themselves not to listen too closely. Lena did not introduce herself. Everyone there knew her name. That was part of the problem. I used to think, she began, that if I could just work hard enough, nobody would notice how scared I was. Her voice trembled on the last word, but did not break. Wyatt kept his hands on the coffee pot. I signed papers I didn't understand because it was February and the room above the garage had heat. Sometimes. I smiled at customers while counting whether I had enough money left for cold medicine. I told myself Orson was hard on everyone. I told myself the debt was my fault because my name was on it. No one moved. I am not here to say I was perfect. I was tired. I was angry. Some days I lied and said I was fine because I could not afford the truth. Some days I hated every person who left a $1 tip and called themselves generous. A sound moved through the room. Not offense. Recognition. Lena looked down at the paper, then set it aside. I am here because my name was used to collect relief money I never received. I am here because I was helped on paper and trapped in real life. And I am here because I don't want anyone else in this town to be made ashamed of needing warmth. She stepped back. The silence after her words was not empty. It was crowded. It had chairs, names, old storms, unsigned apologies. It had the weight of every person in the room deciding whether the floor would hold if they stood on it. Then Frank rose. He did it slowly, palms pressing against the table. He had washed his beard for the occasion badly. His green canvas jacket had a fresh patch on one elbow and a grease stain near the pocket that no mortal power could remove. He took the microphone like it might bite. "Name's Frank Arlen," he said. "Used to fix things around here. Griddles, heaters, sinks, whatever decided to die on a Tuesday." A few people smiled. "I slept in my van behind this diner one winter. Thought that was kindness. Maybe some of it was. I ate soup ends, pie ends, coffee so old it was old enough to vote." Lena almost smiled. "Then I got a bill. Damaged tools, room balance, meal debt, disorderly conduct." He paused. That last one means I told Orson Pike to do something anatomically impossible after he charged me for fixing his own heater." The laughter came quicker this time, rough and grateful. Frank's face softened when it faded. "I signed because I was cold. That's the whole sermon. I was cold, and a warm room starts looking like heaven even when the devil owns the thermostat." He put the microphone down. One by one, others followed. The freight driver said her name was Marcy Bell, and she had once been billed for 2 nights in a room she never slept in after the fund supposedly paid for emergency lodging. She had a square jaw, a cracked lower lip, and a voice made steady by long highways. A former electrician named Owen Kells spoke next. He was narrow-shouldered, with a gray ponytail and hands that trembled until he gripped the microphone with both of them. He said he lost contract work after a behavior report described him as aggressive because he had asked why a fuel voucher became a debt. A woman from the back did not give her full name. She only said, "I was told gratitude meant not asking for receipts." That sentence changed the room. Wyatt saw it land. People who had come to observe began looking down at their own hands. People who had come to judge found judgment sitting beside them like an unwelcome neighbor. Even those who had not been harmed began to understand that kindness with a ledger was not kindness. It was a leash. Near the 2/3 mark of the evening, an older man in a clean brown overcoat stood up. Wyatt recognized him vaguely from the church steps, always beside collection baskets during winter drives. His name was Thomas Rell, a retired school principal with careful hair and a voice that had once made classrooms behave. "I donated to that fund every year," Thomas said. No one interrupted him. "I believe the money bought meals, coats, rooms. I gave because my wife died in January, and after that, I could not stand thinking of anyone alone in the cold." His mouth tightened. "If what I gave became a chain around someone's neck, then my grief was used as bait." He sat down before anyone could answer. That was the moment the evening became larger than injury. It was no longer only the harmed speaking to the powerful. It was the deceived beginning to understand they too had been made useful to cruelty. The door opened at 8:13. Deputy Harlan Coe entered with snow on his shoulders and 2 uniformed officers behind him who looked younger than the room's fear. The conversation thinned. Cups lowered. Someone near the back whispered a prayer or a curse. Harlan removed his gloves slowly. "Evening," he said. No one replied. His eyes moved to the microphone, to Mara, to Wyatt, then to Lena. "We've had complaints about a disturbance." Frank leaned toward B and whispered, "Disturbance is what cowards call a mirror." B coughed into her napkin. Wyatt stepped from behind the counter. Vesper rose with him. The dog did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply walked to Wyatt's side and stood there, broad chest forward, amber eyes fixed on the deputy. The room held its breath, but Wyatt felt no pull toward anger this time. That was new. Anger stood nearby, yes, pacing like a wolf behind a fence, but it was not driving. "This is a private gathering," Wyatt said. Everyone here is here by choice." Harlan smiled with official patience. "Private gatherings can still disrupt public order." Lena moved beside Wyatt. People are telling stories. Stories can become accusations. Mara rose from the back table. Accusations supported by documentation are generally called evidence. Harlan's smile cooled. Wyatt lifted his phone from the counter. "For the record," he said, voice even, "each person speaking tonight has consented before being recorded. Copies of documents related to the Winter Relief Fund have been sent to a reporter in Duluth, the county prosecutor's office, and legal aid. To a reporter in Duluth, the county prosecutor's office, and legal aid. Any attempt to intimidate people in this room will be noted and added." One of the young officers looked at Harlan. That glance was small, but not invisible. Harlan saw it too. Before he could answer, the door opened again. Mara Ellison had already been in the room, so everyone turned in confusion. A man in a dark parka entered, stamping snow from his boots. He carried a messenger bag and wore wire-rimmed glasses, fogged from the cold. Mara crossed to him before anyone spoke. "This is Daniel Ivers," she said. He said, "Independent auditor contracted through the county's emergency review office." Daniel Ivers looked like a man who spent more time with spreadsheets than sunlight. Thin, pale, serious, with a tired kindness in his eyes. He nodded to the room, then to Harlan. "The county has initiated a temporary freeze on Winter Relief Fund accounts pending review," he said, "effective immediately." For once, Harlan had no ready softness. The room did not cheer. That would have been too simple, too clean. Instead, people absorbed the news in different ways. Marcy closed her eyes. Owen sat down hard, as if his knees had misplaced their purpose. Thomas Rell covered his mouth with one hand. Shiti B began to cry silently, which seemed to irritate her, so she took notes in her unopened notebook to disguise it. Near the window, Orson Pike stood outside in the snow. He had not entered. His camel coat was buttoned, his hair neat beneath his hat. Through the glass his face looked blurred by frost and blue neon. He watched the diner not like a man defeated, but like a man realizing the door he had built for others now had a lock on his side too. Then he turned and walked away. The night continued after that, but changed shape. Some people spoke less bravely after Harlan left. Others spoke more. Mara took names only when offered. Daniel Ivers listened with the stunned endurance of a man discovering that numbers could have ghosts. Frank fixed the microphone twice and threatened to unionize it. Vesper returned to his place by the stove, though his eyes never closed fully. Wyatt kept pouring coffee. It seemed ridiculous, almost holy, how much coffee mattered when people were telling the truth. Hands needed something to hold. Mouths needed a reason to pause. Bodies needed proof they had not been abandoned while their stories left them. After the last person went home and the chairs sat crooked in the tired room, Lena stepped outside. Wyatt followed a moment later, not too close. The storm had passed into a softer fall. Snow drifted down through the blue light, turning the alley and sidewalk into something almost gentle. The lake beyond the street reflected the moon in broken silver. Lena stood beneath the sign with her arms wrapped around herself. Wyatt thought she might cry. Instead, she watched the snow land on her sleeves. "I thought saying it would make me feel lighter," she said. Wyatt waited. "It doesn't. Not yet." She breathed in slowly. "It feels like someone cleaned out a room, and now I can hear how empty it is." Vesper came outside and pressed his head into her hand. This time, Lena did not seem surprised by the comfort. Her fingers moved through the thick fur between his ears, slow and sure. Wyatt stood beside her, close enough to share the silence, far enough not to crowd it. He did not tell her it would be all right. He did not tell her she was brave. He did not turn pain into a lesson while it was still standing there with snow on its shoulders. He only stayed. The blue sign buzzed above them, flickered once, then steadied again. And in that small winter town, under a sky still heavy with snow, the blue lantern did what lanterns were born to do. It kept burning where the dark expected obedience. 3 weeks after the night of stories, Brightwater did not transform. It did not wake under cathedral bells and declare itself cleansed. No one painted over every old lie by morning. No parade came down Harbor Street. No headline arrived with a golden sword in its teeth. The town changed the way winter changed a shoreline. Slowly. First, there were phone calls, then closed doors, then people seen leaving the county office with folders tucked under their arms. The Brightwater Winter Relief Fund was suspended pending investigation. Its accounts remained frozen. Daniel Ivers came and went from town with the exhausted expression of a man discovering that numbers could smell faintly of smoke. Deputy Harlan Coe was placed on administrative leave. That phrase sounded too gentle to Lena, like someone had tucked a blanket around a snake. But she accepted it because it meant Harlan no longer walked into the Blue Lantern with the weight of the law on his shoulders. For now, that was enough. Orson Pike left town before his second formal interview. No one saw him go. One morning, his old apartment above Mulligan's Bar had empty windows, and the bartender said Orson had driven south before dawn. There were rumors, of course. Brightwater fed on rumor the way gulls fed behind fishing boats. Some said he had gone to Arizona. Some said Duluth. Frank said a man like Orson didn't leave town so much as molt into a new jacket somewhere else. Wyatt didn't celebrate. A gone man could still leave debts behind. Eloise Grant received audit notices on all 3 of her rental buildings. 2 local businesses stopped answering questions from reporters. The church removed the winter relief donation basket from the entryway and replaced it with a small printed statement about cooperation, accountability, and prayer. B. from the post office read the statement aloud over breakfast and said, "That sentence was built by 6 people, afraid of one verb." Frank raised his coffee, Ed his coffee. May the verb survive. The Blue Lantern survived too, though not gracefully. The old fund's collapse created a vacuum. That was the part nobody had wanted to say out loud. Corruption was ugly, yes, but it had been ugly inside a structure. Once the structure cracked, the people who had depended on it, even unwillingly, still needed heat, meals, rooms, fuel, repairs, rides, forms translated, phone calls made, and someone to tell them they were not crazy for asking where the money went. The diner became a waiting room for all of it. Not because Wyatt planned it, because people came. A woman needed help reading an eviction notice. Notice. A man wanted to know whether a debt from 3 winters ago could follow him across county lines. Marcy Bell brought 2 drivers stranded by whiteout conditions and said, "Feed them before they start trusting vending machine chili." Owen Kells came in with a folder of old invoices and sat with Mara for an hour, hands shaking less when Vesper slept across his boots. Lena watched it happen with a face that grew more thoughtful by the day. One afternoon, after lunch had faded and the late winter sun poured clean light across the counter, she placed both palms on the register and said, "We can't just become the place everyone brings broken things." Wyatt was repairing a loose shelf behind the pie case. "Why not?" "Because we'll break too." The shelf slipped and hit his thumb. He swore quietly. Lena gave him a towel. That was the universe agreeing with me. Wyatt wrapped his thumb and looked around the diner. Diner. Frank was in the back fixing the heater again, though he claimed it was not broken, merely expressing political dissatisfaction. Vesper lay by the front window, but no longer pressed close to the door as if expecting trouble. Customers came and went under the blue sign. The stove hummed. Someone had left a jar by the register labeled winter meal money in B's handwriting. It held $18, 2 quarters, and a button. "You're right," Wyatt said. Lena blinked. "That was sudden. Are you feverish?" "We need a structure." "You hate paperwork." "I hate bad paperwork." That's like saying you hate bad snakes. Some snakes are useful. No, he almost smiled. That evening, they invited Mara to stay after closing. Frank refused to leave because, according to him, any meeting involving the future of a diner required at least one man who knew where the fuse box was. Vesper placed himself beneath the table, which made the meeting official in Wyatt's mind. Mara listened while Wyatt explained his idea badly. Then Lena explained it better. A community meal program, public ledger, no debt agreements, no repayment contracts. People could pay, volunteer, donate supplies, or simply eat. Every dollar in and out written on a board beside the counter. Every donor able to see where money went. Every recipient spared the little theater of proving misery. Mara looked at Wyatt over her glasses. You're trying to run a restaurant, a mutual aid kitchen, an emergency referral point, and a moral repair shop. Frank nodded. Needs a shorter name. Lena said, The Blue Lantern. Mara sighed. That sigh had been made by banks, widows, saints, and women who knew men would mistake foolishness for courage unless someone put columns beside it. If you do this informally, you will fail, Mara said. If you do it legally, you may merely suffer. Promising, Wyatt said. She took out a notebook. There are cooperative models, she said, worker ownership, community benefit structures, nonprofit partnerships. And the diner itself can remain a business, but the meal fund must be separated, transparent, auditable, no cash wandering into coffee cans. B's jar, visible from the counter, seemed suddenly ashamed of itself. Lena leaned forward. Could employees own shares? Mara looked at her, and something in her face softened with professional reluctance. Yes? Wyatt looked at Lena. Lena looked back. There had been a time, not long ago, when she stood in this diner as if every tile under her feet belonged to someone who could pull it away. Now she asked about shares. Not permission. Shares. The word moved through Wyatt like the first thaw under snow. A week later, papers were signed in Mara's office. Not the old kind of papers, the kind that hid knives under formal language. These were still complicated, still suspiciously fond of subclauses, but Mara walked them through each section until even Frank stopped pretending his headache was fatal. Lena became co-owner and operations lead. She read the words 3 times. Operations lead. Then she set the pen down and looked out Mara's office window toward the frozen lake. Wyatt waited for joy. Instead, Lena wiped under one eye with the heel of her hand and said, I wish I could hand this paper to the version of me who signed Orson's freezer debt. No one rushed to comfort her. Mara simply slid a copy across the desk. Keep one for her, she said. Lena folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. Frank became maintenance coordinator, which he said sounded like a title invented by someone who had never crawled under a sink in February. He accepted anyway, mainly because it came with access to the tool closet and the right to complain officially. The meal fund board went up beside the counter 3 days later. Winter Table Fund. This week's donations, $312.40. Meals served, 47 fuel vouchers, 3 emergency room nights, 2, no debts, no shame, ask Lena, Wyatt, or Mara. Frank added below it in smaller letters. Coffee complaints go to Vesper. Wyatt crossed it out. Coffee complaints go to Vesper. Wyatt crossed it out. Vesper, who was lying beneath the board, looked offended. People noticed the board. That was the point. Some stared too long. Some dropped money in the new locked box and looked away quickly. Thomas Rell began coming every Friday with an envelope marked for meals, and each time he stayed to wash dishes afterward. Not as penance exactly. Something quieter. Something with sleeves rolled up. The church ladies came eventually, led by a woman named Agnes Bellwether, who wore purple mittens and carried herself with the terrifying efficiency of someone who had organized funerals, bake sales, and moral weather for 40 years. She told Lena the church kitchen had too much canned tomato and not enough humility. Lena accepted both. Change did not make everyone kind. Some customers stopped coming. A few muttered that Wyatt had turned the diner political. Someone scratched the word parasites into the snow crust on the side window one morning. Lena saw it first, looked at it for a long time, then handed Wyatt the scraper. "Don't make a speech," she said. "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking one?" "It had structure." "Scrape." He scraped. That was how much of healing looked, he learned. Not like thunder, like scraping one ugly word off glass before breakfast. Late in February, on a morning so bright the snow outside seemed lit from underneath, Wyatt arrived from the back room to find the diner already alive. Lena stood behind the counter, hair tied high, silver bird clip catching the light. She held a coffee pot in one hand and a pencil behind one ear, ruling the breakfast rush with the calm ferocity of a small goddess of caffeine and survival. "2 pancakes for booth 3, she called. "Frank, if that heater bangs again, I am naming it after you." "It would be honored," Frank shouted from the kitchen. Bea laughed into her toast. Marcy Bell, snow still melting from her boots, sat near the window and argued with Owen over whether truck stop pie counted as a regional cuisine. Thomas Rell folded napkins with the solemnity of a man handling flags. Someone near the door said, "Morning, boss," to Wyatt. Wyatt pointed at Lena without slowing. "Ask her. I'm just the driver hired by the dog." Lena did not look over. "And you're late." "I live here." Still late. The room laughed. It came easily now, that laughter. Not because pain had disappeared, but because pain no longer owned every chair. Wyatt poured coffee for booth 4, then paused. Vesper was not at the door. For 1 second, the old alarm moved through him. He turned too quickly, scanning the room. Then he saw the dog. Vesper lay in the middle of the diner near the stove, on his back, all 4 paws loose in the air, gray cream belly exposed to the warm room, as if no harm in the world had ever learned how to open doors. His right ear flopped sideways. His lantern tag rested against his throat. His eyes were half closed. Complete trust looked ridiculous. Wyatt felt something inside him stop bracing. For months, maybe years, Vesper had slept facing exits. In motel rooms, beside truck stops, outside gas stations, in borrowed garages, the dog always positioned his body between Wyatt and whatever might enter. Even here, at first, Vesper had belonged to the threshold, watching, weighing, ready. Now he slept in the center, not guarding the way out, claiming the inside. Lena followed Wyatt's gaze. For once, she did not make a joke. She came to stand beside him, coffee pot warm in her hand. "He finally stopped expecting us to run," she said. Wyatt swallowed. Outside, snow fell gently through clean sunlight. The blue sign glowed in the window, reflected faintly on the pale surface of the frozen lake. Plates clinked. The stove hissed. Frank cursed affectionately at something metallic. Someone asked for more syrup. Someone else dropped $3 into the meal fund box and wrote their own total on the board without being told. A breakfast, that was all. No grand ending, no crown placed on anyone's head, no villain dragged through town while the righteous applauded. Just a breakfast in a diner that had once kept accounts of hunger and now kept a public count of mercy. Wyatt had spent years believing he and Vesper were only passing through winter towns. 2 shadows with tire tracks behind them. 2 creatures, too, practiced at leaving to be trusted with a home. But some places did not keep people with chains. Some kept them with soup that asked no questions. With a name spoken kindly. Chum, with work shared honestly. with a woman behind the counter who no longer lowered her eyes, with an old mechanic who could fix nearly anything except his manners, with a banker who made compassion learn arithmetic, with a dog asleep on his back because the room had finally convinced him the world could be safe for a while. Wyatt reached into his coat pocket and touched the dented silver Zippo. He did not take it out. There was already enough light. Vesper opened one amber eye, saw Wyatt watching, and thumped his tail once against the floor. "Stay," the sound seemed to say. This time Wyatt did not need the dog to say it twice. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is not fighting louder, but staying long enough to make a place safe again. Wyatt did not save Brightwater with money, power, or perfect answers. He simply refused to let kindness become another kind of debt. And in that small diner, beneath the blue light and falling snow, people remembered something holy. Mercy should warm the hungry, not chain them. Maybe today, someone near you does not need a grand rescue. Maybe they only need a seat at the table, a name spoken kindly, or one person willing to stay. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what the Blue Lantern meant to you. And if you want more stories of hope, loyalty, and quiet grace, please subscribe and come back for the next one. May your home be warm, your heart be steady, and may God place a small light on your road when the night feels long.